They said love lasts forever. But what happens when the person you trusted the most shatters everything in a single moment? Imagine watching the one you love, the one you built your life with, smile, laugh, and dance with someone else as if you didn't even exist. That's what happened to Meera. Heartbroken, humiliated, yet burning with quiet anger, she vanished without a word. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning. A story of betrayal, secrets, and a revenge so precise it would leave everyone stunned. This is her journey from heartbreak to empowerment, a story of strength, courage, and freedom. Before we dive into today's story, I want to know something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to see all your locations and time zones. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join our family here at Revenge Unfolded. More stories, more drama, and more justice are waiting for you. The evening air was thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft glow of chandeliers. But for Meera, the noise felt distant, almost muffled. She adjusted the strap of her black dress nervously, feeling the smooth fabric press against her skin as if reminding her of the composure she was desperately trying to maintain. Her eyes scanned the grand hall, taking in the swirling crowd, the glittering gowns, the polished smiles, but her heart thumped with a quiet unease. Elegance and subtlety had always been her armor, a quiet confidence that needed no announcement. Tonight, though, that armor felt fragile. Armin moved through the crowd with the effortless charm she had once adored, his tailored navy suit hugging his frame perfectly. The infuriating smile that had once made her heart flutter now sparked a cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. His hand brushed against women as he laughed at jokes, and each contact made her pulse race, not with desire, but with an inexplicable dread. She told herself to breathe, to ignore the nagging feeling, but her intuition whispered a warning she could no longer silence. They had been married for 10 years, a decade filled with laughter, arguments, quiet companionship, and shared dreams. She had trusted him fully, loved him fiercely, often at the expense of her own instincts. And yet tonight, something in the air was off, almost imperceptible, and her chest constricted with the mix of anticipation and unease. Then she saw her. A woman glided toward Armin with a confidence that seemed to bend the very light around her. Her features were striking, elegant, and poised, the kind of presence that drew attention effortlessly. Mira's breath caught, her stomach twisting as shock and disbelief collided in her chest. Armin's eyes lit up in a way they hadn't for her in years, a smile stretching across his face that was no casual acknowledgement. It was a spark of delight, intimate and personal. Before Meera could even process the movement, he took the stranger's hand and pulled her close. And then they danced. Not a polite, socially distant dance, not a friendly sway to the music, but intimately. His hands rested lightly yet possessively on his waist, her laughter bubbling up at something only he seemed to understand. Meera's knees went weak, a hot wave of nausea and shock washing over her. The floor beneath her felt unsteady, as if it could swallow her whole, as if the world itself had betrayed her. Time slowed. Every detail etched itself into her memory. The way his eyes crinkled in amusement, the ease in their closeness, the warmth in his voice directed at another. Every memory of their marriage, the late-night talks, whispered promises, quiet gestures of love, now seemed fragile, ephemeral, illusions shattered by a single, undeniable act. Mira's heart ached in a way that left her breathless. Humiliation clawed at her chest like sharp teeth, and anger flared hot, sharp and insistent. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, danced, completely oblivious to the personal devastation unfolding in their midst. She wanted to scream, to throw herself into his arms demanding the truth, to shake him until he admitted what she already knew in the marrow of her bones. The man she had loved, trusted, and lived for had chosen someone else. But she didn't move.
Instead, she drew a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the dress gather in her trembling fists. Anger replaced shock, burning with a clarity that cut through the fog of hurt. How dare he? How dare he reduce her existence to nothing in front of everyone? She fought back the tears, the shaky sobs threatening to spill, refusing to give him the satisfaction of witnessing her unravel. There would be no scene, no confrontation, no dramatic collapse. She would not be a character in his betrayal. She would be the author of her own response. She edged toward the balcony, each step deliberate, silent. The cool night air hit her face, caressing our heated skin, calming the storm inside. Leaning against the railing, she closed her eyes, letting the breeze carry away the first waves of shock, the initial sting of heartbreak. Her chest rose and fell as she counted to 10, summoning clarity from chaos. Her mind raced. What could she do? How could she respond? The rage that simmered inside her was intoxicating, yet she knew impulsive action would only diminish her power. No, she needed patience, strategy, and precision. Her thoughts sharpened like blades, cold and deliberate, slicing through the haze of hurt. Revenge would not be about screams or tears. It would be about timing, subtlety, and impact. The muffled laughter of Armin and the stranger drifted to her ears, each peal a sting, each chuckle a challenge. Yet amid the humiliation, clarity began to crystallize. She would vanish. Not in anger, not in hysteria, but quietly, decisively. While he reveled in what he imagined as triumph, she would rebuild. She would gather knowledge, allies, and resources. The betrayal he treated as trivial would become the cornerstone of his undoing. Inside, she collected her essentials: purse, phone, and a few items carefully chosen for anonymity. Not a single gaze followed her. In a hall of noise and glitter, she became invisible, a shadow slipping silently into the night. The perfume she left behind lingered faintly, a whisper of presence that he would not immediately notice. Outside, the city shimmered beneath a blanket of darkness, lights reflecting in her teary eyes. Each step away from the party, from the man who had once been her world, was heavy, yet liberating. Heartbreak, humiliation, and rage mingled with the growing, fierce sense of empowerment. She was no longer the wife who endured quietly. She was becoming someone new, someone sharp, unstoppable, and untouchable. By the time she reached her car, the glow of the party behind her felt like a distant memory. Her knuckles gripped the steering wheel tightly, white with tension, yet her mind was composed, calculating. The night belonged to her now, silent, empty, and full of potential. This moment would not define her, though it would shape her profoundly. Driving through the quiet streets, Meera's thoughts were precise. First, disappear entirely. Erase every trace of her existence. Let Armin stew in ignorance and overconfidence. Then, gather knowledge, allies, and resources. The pulse of anticipation quickened her heartbeat, not with anger alone, but with the exhilaration of a plan approaching fruition. Revenge was no longer a wish. It was inevitable. Pulling into the dimly lit parking lot of a small hotel reserved under an alias, she allowed herself one final glance at the city skyline. The party, the laughter, the betrayal, all behind her. Ahead stretched a path she would carve with intellect, patience, and precision. The woman stepping into the night tonight was transformed, unstoppable, and ready to reclaim her life. Closing her eyes, she whispered into the darkness, "I'll make him see. I'll make him regret underestimating me. And when I'm done, I'll be free." The night wrapped around her like a cloak, carrying her away from the shattering moment and toward the future she would command. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, falling on an apartment that felt strangely hollow. Where once there had been laughter, warmth, and the comforting aroma of coffee, there was now an eerie silence. Meera moved quietly through the space, her footsteps muted against the polished wooden floor, each movement deliberate and controlled. Every photograph, every carefully chosen decoration whispered of the life she was leaving behind, memories of love, trust, and shared days, but she felt no hesitation. She left nothing behind, no notes, no messages, no signs of her exit. Years of experience had taught her that closure was often a chain binding the weak. True power came from discretion. As she stepped into the bustling city streets, the rhythm of morning traffic, honking cars, and distant chatter seemed to harmonize with the steady beat of her own heart. She was vanishing, not in fear, but with intention. With every step, she shed the weight of betrayal, transforming it into resolve, focus, and the beginnings of untouchable strength. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, panic rippled through Armand like an electric shock. Returning home late that evening, expecting the warmth of Meera's smile, he found emptiness. Her belongings gone, her presence erased. Confusion twisted into a creeping fear, curling in his chest like smoke. He called her phone, each unanswered ring a dagger twisting in his growing anxiety. Texts followed, each one more desperate, each one ignored, unanswered. "Where is she?" he muttered, pacing the empty apartment, his brow furrowed, disbelief edged into every line of his face. How could she just disappear? Calls poured in from his parents, friends, and even colleagues of Meera's, all seeking answers. Each inquiry met with silence, heightening the unease. The image of the devoted wife, the caring companion, had vanished, leaving only questions, suspicion, and a faint, gnawing realization. Perhaps they had never truly known her. Meanwhile, Meera breathed in her newfound freedom. She had arrived at a modest apartment in a distant city booked under an alias. The anonymity felt like a balm, soothing the sting of betrayal and offering a space to think, to breathe, to rebuild. Subtle changes in hair, clothing, and posture transformed her appearance in public. She became unremarkable, invisible to strangers, yet every detail of her surroundings was absorbed with keen observation. Her days quickly fell into disciplined structure. Mornings were dedicated to research, quietly tracing Armand's social connections, business dealings, and the life of the woman who had sparked her departure. Every social media post, every online interaction, every business report became a piece of a puzzle. She cataloged patterns, noting vulnerabilities and weaknesses that he had thought were hidden, waiting for the moment to strike. Discoveries sparked a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Armand's arrogance, casual betrayals, and careless actions ignited her fury, while the realization that these flaws could be leveraged gave her a sense of power she had never fully known. The woman he had danced with, once seeming untouchable, was now a thread in a web she was carefully weaving. Each secret she uncovered became a tool, each slip a brick in the foundation of her plan. Loneliness, however, remained a quiet companion. She missed the familiarity of old streets, the comfort of family, even the pangs of love she had once felt for Armand. Yet she reminded herself constantly, pain was temporary, but the path she was carving, though solitary, was one of ultimate liberation. Sleepless nights and bouts of nostalgia only steeled her determination further. Her family's worry was tangible. Her mother called repeatedly, chastising Armand for his negligence. Her father's voice trembled with concern and disbelief. She wouldn't just leave like this. Something must have happened, he insisted. But Armand, blinded by pride and arrogance, refused to consider that he had misjudged her. He assumed she would return, that her pride alone would not allow her to vanish entirely. Meera smiled at this quiet arrogance, his first, critical mistake. In her apartment, she established routines, mirroring her old life structure, yet every element diverged in purpose. Work was discreet but fulfilling. Social interactions were measured, careful, never allowing intimacy to reveal her true identity. Nights were reserved for reflection, planning, and meticulous note-taking. Every observation of Armand catalogued, every thought and strategy committed to paper. One evening, as rain streaked the windows and blurred the city lights into lines of gold and silver, a surge of emotion overtook her. Anger, yes, but also clarity. The man who thought her absence would cause chaos underestimated her entirely. Every misstep, every arrogance, every weakness she had discovered was now a weapon in her hands. She, Meera, was the wielder of patience, intelligence, and precise planning, a power he could not begin to comprehend. Her anonymity became both shield and canvas. She tested subtle ideas, planted hints, and gently influenced perceptions within Armand's social circle. Each reaction, each ripple, each small victory validated her plan. Slowly, she understood the man she had loved, the man who had betrayed her, not just in actions, but in the social web he depended on to inflate his ego. Every lie, every misstep, every arrogance became a thread she could pull at the right time. Armand, in contrast, remained blind. He scrolled through empty messages, replayed the party in his mind, and fretted over things beyond his control. The woman he had danced with remained ignorant of the silent, meticulous storm forming around her. Weeks bled into months. Rumors of her disappearance circulated, questions arose, yet Meera's focus never wavered. She grew stronger, sharper, and steadier with each passing day. Heartbreak fueled strategy. Humiliation became preparation. Anger transformed into unyielding resolve. One rainy evening, she paused by her window, watching city lights streak through the downpour. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. The vanishing act had succeeded. She was free, but freedom alone was not enough. Revenge was an art, and she intended to execute it with precision, patience, and impact. Her fingers traced the edges of her notebook, every secret, every weakness, every potential leverage point documented. Soon, she whispered into the night, letting the rain carry her vow, soon he will understand what it means to underestimate me. The vanishing act was over. The next phase had begun.
The small apartment Meera now called home had become more than just a place to sleep. It was her war room. Every corner whispered purpose. Her laptop, neatly stacked notebooks, and carefully organized files created a map not only of the life she had left behind, but of the life she intended to reshape for herself alone. Betrayal, once a raw wound in her heart, had transformed into fuel, igniting a determination as precise as it was unstoppable. Months of vanishing into anonymity had given her access to a side of Armand she had never truly seen. The man she had trusted implicitly was, in truth, a labyrinth of flaws, secrets, and vulnerabilities. Hidden financial indiscretions lurked in complicated documents. Casual brags in private messages revealed his arrogance, and subtle social weaknesses begged to be exploited. Every conversation she overheard, every online trace she discovered, every hint from acquaintances became threads in the intricate web she was weaving. Her first discovery brought a bitter smile. Armand's carefully curated social image, designed to impress colleagues, friends, and business partners, was fragile. Beneath the charm and charisma, cracks existed, cracks that Meera could widen with patience, intelligence, and cunning. She began with subtlety. At a networking event, disguised under her new identity, she casually discussed aspects of Armand's financial decisions with mutual contacts who respected her business insight. She watched their eyes widen in concern, their whispers ripple through the room. Quiet victories, she reminded herself, often paved the way for the largest collapses. Next came the personal strategy. The woman he had danced with, the naive, ambitious stranger, was approachable, moldable. Meera reached out under the guise of a friendly acquaintance in social circles, planting seeds of doubt, hinting at Armand's selfishness and arrogance. Each interaction required meticulous care. A single misstep could reveal her identity, unraveling months of careful preparation. But Meera's patience, intelligence, and inner calm guided her every move. Financial tactics soon followed. Though she had no direct access to his accounts, loopholes in partnerships and subtle mismanagement could be exposed indirectly. By sending anonymous insights to key partners, she quietly eroded Armand's credibility. These invisible victories, incremental yet potent, would eventually cascade into an unstoppable force. Yet this journey was not only tactical, it was transformative. The pain of betrayal, once a gaping wound, had become clarity incarnate. She had learned to trust her intuition again, relying on intellect over raw emotion. Each flaw discovered, each vulnerability exposed, strengthened her sense of self-reliance. She was no longer powerless. She was shaping her destiny, and with it, subtly influencing the life of the man who had once dared to betray her. Socially, she was a ghost in Armin's world, but a quietly respected figure elsewhere. Allies emerged, unaware of their connection to him, but loyal and influential, ready to become crucial instruments in her plan. Advice, insights, small nudges of perception, they accumulated, forming a silent network of influence, all building toward the eventual reckoning. In private moments, Meera reflected on the emotional metamorphosis she had undergone. The loving, sometimes overly trusting wife had been replaced by someone who balanced intellect with intuition, patience with decisiveness. Heartbreak had been refined into resilience. Humiliation had become the soil in which her power grew. She no longer reacted impulsively. She anticipated, calculated, and orchestrated outcomes with precision. Her planning sessions often stretched deep into the night. Desks cluttered with charts, maps, and annotations bore witness to the transformation. Psychological profiles, financial ledgers, social connections, all meticulously documented. Every observation was a tool, every minor detail a potential lever. The slightest oversight could jeopardize months of preparation, and Meera refused to allow such a lapse. Emotional reflection remained part of the process. She missed aspects of her past life, the comfort of familiar streets, the echoes of happier days, but such longing was fleeting. It reminded her of the stakes and reinforced the necessity of her unwavering focus. Weeks turned into months, and Meera's influence quietly permeated Armin's world. Rumors began to circulate, quiet reassessments took place among his colleagues, and subtle doubts emerged in social circles. Each ripple validated her meticulous approach. Her patience, intelligence, and strategic insight were stacking small victories into a foundation for inevitable, large-scale triumph. And yet the true revelation was internal. Revenge was no longer simply retaliation, it was reclamation. Agency, control, self-worth, these were her weapons, more powerful than humiliation or exposure. Every secret she uncovered, every flaw she exploited, every ally she gained affirmed her transformation. She was no longer the betrayed wife. She was the tactician, the strategist, the quiet force shaping outcomes before anyone realized her presence. Closing her notebook one late evening, Meera caught her reflection in the window. Steady, calm, and unyielding, her eyes burned with controlled intensity. A whisper escaped her lips. Soon they'll see what happens when patience is mistaken for weakness. The secret plan was complete. The execution awaited. Months had passed since Meera vanished, and in that time she had transformed completely. The heartbreak that had once crippled her had evolved into a finely honed plan, an orchestration of empowerment, patience, and calculated revenge. Every detail she had uncovered about Armin, the careless arrogance, shallow friendships, mismanaged finances, had been documented, analyzed, and converted into a strategy as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. The moment for execution had finally arrived. Armin, in stark contrast, continued his life with growing confidence, blind to the storms silently forming around him. He had grown comfortable in the absence of his wife, assuming her departure was a fleeting fit of pride. Tara, the woman who had captivated his attention, felt emboldened, believing her conquest permanent. Both had underestimated Meera, a miscalculation that would soon cost them dearly. Her first moves were subtle yet devastating. Using her network of discreet allies in Armin's business and social circles, she began feeding anonymous tips about his financial mismanagement and unethical dealings. The messages were precise, impossible to dismiss, and crafted to appear credible yet detached. Within days, murmurs of concern rippled through the circles he had once commanded effortlessly. Key partners began questioning his judgment, and doubt, invisible but potent, began to erode his carefully constructed image. Simultaneously, Meera leveraged her social intelligence.
invitations to high-profile gatherings, events that Armand assumed would arrive without question, simply never came. Mutual acquaintances, subtly influenced by her earlier interventions, began to treat him with distance, questioning his credibility without realizing why. The very world that had once elevated him now began to recede, the first cracks of humiliation forming beneath his oblivious feet. But the heart of her revenge was personal. Meera knew that true power came with revelation, the moment he would grasp that the woman he had dismissed was now in complete control. She orchestrated a social gathering, inviting those closest to him under the guise of networking and casual reconciliation. Armand attended, confident and oblivious, flanked by Tara, expecting admiration and reinforcement of his ego. Meera arrived last, under her new identity. Her entrance was quiet, elegant, and commanding, as if the room itself adjusted to her presence. Conversations softened into whispers, attention subtly shifted. Those who knew her as a consultant or social figure now recognized the aura of authority, of someone who commanded respect effortlessly. She was no longer the wife betrayed. She was a force impossible to ignore. The first ripple struck when a key business partner raised concerns about Armand's recent decisions, referencing details Meera had planted months ago. Armand attempted to dismiss the remarks with practiced charm, but the credibility of the information, coupled with the growing subtle doubt among his peers, made his denial falter. A flicker of unease crossed his face, betraying the man who had once believed himself untouchable. Meera waited patiently, letting the discomfort simmer, her expression serene, almost indifferent. When Tara tried to interject, defending Armand, Meera's calm delivery and the undeniable facts exposed not just his negligence, but the superficiality of his charm. Tara's eyes widened in shock. For the first time, she saw the man she admired not as a romantic hero, but as a flawed, self-serving individual. The revelation struck her like a cold wind. She had been a pawn, just as Meera had foreseen. Then came the personal revelation. Meera spoke directly to Armand, recounting incidents from their marriage, subtle betrayals, deliberate disregard, and moments that illustrated his lack of loyalty. Each story was precise, backed by observations and subtle evidence accumulated over months. His confident facade crumbled as the room absorbed her narrative. Colleagues, acquaintances, and social peers who had once admired him now looked on with skepticism and judgment. The humiliation was immediate and visceral. The man who had danced with another woman as if his wife were invisible now realized, too late, the magnitude of his underestimation. Meera's power lay not in anger, not in theatrics, but in strategy, intellect, and timing. She had orchestrated a revelation that left him exposed socially, emotionally, and professionally. Tara, confronted with undeniable truth, recoiled. The woman who had believed herself central to Armand's affections now faced the reality of his duplicity. Witnessing Meera's composed authority and the evidence before her eyes, her admiration dissolved into shame. She withdrew silently, understanding she had been manipulated by a man unworthy of trust or devotion. Meera's satisfaction was quiet but profound. She did not gloat, did not yell, did not indulge in anger. Every move had been deliberate, every outcome carefully considered. Armand, once confident in his power, now faced the full consequence of his arrogance and betrayal. The evening concluded as she had planned, silently and elegantly. Her presence lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed the revelation. Armand was left speechless, Tara withdrawn, perceptions reshaped irrevocably. Every seed planted, every subtle manipulation, every painstakingly executed strategy had culminated in this moment of undeniable clarity. Back in her quiet apartment, Meera allowed herself a small, contented smile. The revelation was complete. Armand had learned the painful truth. The woman he dismissed was now empowered, in control, and untouchable. The storm she had brewed through patience, intelligence, and strategy had reshaped the very world in which he once thrived. And yet, Meera knew the final chapter awaited. True freedom, inner peace, and emotional closure were still hers to claim. Tonight, she had proven her power. Tomorrow, she would embrace the life she had reclaimed, fully, unapologetically, and without looking back. The morning sun poured through the large windows of Meera's new apartment, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. She stretched, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The tension, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, they were all behind her. For the first time since that shattering night at the party, she was free. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The journey of betrayal, silence, strategy, and revelation had led her here, to a place where the weight of heartbreak no longer held her down. Her apartment reflected the transformation within her, minimalistic, organized, yet alive with touches that spoke of comfort and self-respect. Every corner mirrored her inner growth. Sunlight danced across neatly stacked books. A canvas leaning against the wall hinted at long-forgotten passions, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. She moved with calm assurance, each gesture deliberate, each step a quiet affirmation. This life was hers, entirely hers. Months of careful planning and execution had yielded results far beyond her expectations. Her network of professional allies had flourished, recognizing her intelligence, her insight, her integrity. Social whispers that had once surrounded Armand, hints of his arrogance and poor judgment, had transformed into admiration for her talent, respect for her strategy, and acknowledgement of her independence. She was no longer defined by a husband's betrayal, but by her own strength, vision, and resilience. Armand, meanwhile, confronted the irreversible consequences of his actions. The humiliation of the revelation still gnawed at him. Friends distanced themselves. Clients questioned his judgment, and his carefully curated reputation lay in ruins. Each misstep he had ignored now loomed large. He replayed that fateful night, the party, the dancing, the laughter that had once seemed inconsequential now seared into his memory. His arrogance had blinded him. His ego had convinced him that betrayal would go unnoticed, that charm could mask his flaws, and that Meera's silence was weakness. But silence had been her weapon, patience her shield, intelligence her sword. From afar, Meera allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Her triumph was hers alone. Compassion for Armand was unnecessary. This was about her reclamation, her empowerment. Words were unnecessary. Her actions had spoken louder than any confrontation could. She no longer needed validation from anyone else. The world had already witnessed her resilience, and she had witnessed her own transformation. Her days were now filled with purpose and possibilities. Professionally, she carved a niche where her skills were respected and her contributions valued. Projects challenged her intellect, creativity, and leadership, earning admiration without reliance on anyone's approval. Socially, she connected with individuals who shared her values and vision, building bonds based on trust, mutual respect, and authenticity. Every relationship she nurtured reflected her growth, her ability to recognize worth, and her newfound power to set boundaries. In quiet moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of betrayal, once unbearable, had become the catalyst for growth. Each chapter of her past, The heartbreak at the party, the vanishing act, the secret planning, and the public revelation had contributed to the emergence of a stronger, wiser, and self-reliant woman. Freedom, she realized, was not just the absence of oppression. It was the presence of self-awareness, self-respect, and the courage to embrace life on her own terms. Evenings were often spent journaling, documenting victories, and envisioning her future. These rituals reminded her of how far she had come, from a woman who had felt invisible and powerless to one who commanded her own destiny. Emotional closure had come not from the downfall of another, but from reclaiming her own voice, her own agency, her own story. One afternoon, while sipping tea at a quiet cafe, she overheard whispers about Armand's ongoing struggles. A quiet smile touched her lips. The information brought no desire for revenge, only affirmation. Her lesson had been delivered, the message received, and her part in that chapter complete. What mattered now was her life, her joy, and her peace. Meera allowed herself to explore new beginnings. She reconnected with long-neglected passions, painting, reading, traveling, and celebrated her independence and self-expression. She met inspiring people, embraced new experiences, and slowly discovered that trust, companionship, and even love could exist again, but on her terms, without compromise or fear. The man who had once made her feel invisible was now a distant memory, a cautionary tale. Armand's reflection on his mistakes came too late. The cost of his actions was irreversible. Meera had turned every setback into a stepping stone, every tear into fuel, and every fear into courage. Her life was no longer defined by anyone else's choices. It belonged entirely to her. On a quiet evening, standing on her balcony as the sun dipped below the horizon, Meera felt profound closure. The city stretched below her, alive with lights and possibilities. She had faced heartbreak, executed her plan with quiet, undeniable power, and emerged victorious. Not just over her husband, but over the doubts, limitations, and insecurities that had once held her back. A soft breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of possibility and the promise of the future. Bright, independent, and full of potential. She smiled, her heart light, her mind clear, her spirit unburdened. Whispering softly, she said, "I am free. I am whole. And this is just the beginning." The triumph was complete. The freedom was real. Meera had not only reclaimed her life, she had transformed it. Her story, once defined by betrayal and heartbreak, was now a testament to resilience, empowerment, and the courage to rise above. No longer a wife defined by another's choices, Meera stood tall, a woman who had turned pain into power, strategy into victory, and absence into undeniable strength.